So our theme in September is practical spirituality. Is that what it was? Yeah, it's practical spirituality. Yeah. At a moment. And then our topic today is the big three. So I'm going to start out with the big three because I don't want you to be thinking about it the whole talk, because I always have to give context, so it won't come till the end. But before I go to the big three, I just have to tell you this morning, with themes and topics throughout the week and have conversations. So and this morning I was working on the talk, so I felt pretty complete. And then I had a conversation with Julian, and so I can't use it today, but he did give me a totally different slant on it. I asked him, I said, well, what do you if I said practical spirituality, what does that mean to you? And he goes, oh, it means having fun. And I'm like, oh, I didn't go there. And I asked him how that was, and he said, in Montessori, that since they're young, you do your practical life where after you get your works done, you go and do practical life, which is the fun stuff. So he associates practical with fun. And I'm like, wow, that's cool. Yay, Montessori. Okay, so that was just a fun conversation that we had. So the big three are humility, unconditional gratitude, and forgiveness. But first, on the first Sunday of every month, I like to give a context for the theme. And the theme is practical spirituality is such a pervasive phrase that you hear in New Thought, and yet it's one that I have struggled with. So practical is something that we see in our everyday life. And I looked it up, I looked up practical and I looked up spirituality. And the definition for spirituality, I didn't Google it. It was an actual dictionary, so it might be an old definition. But the idea was otherworldly. And for hundreds of years, spirituality was otherworldly. It was heaven was way off there. God was way off there. It's something that was far away, and then this was dark, heavy earth. And so what happened as we have evolved is we started to recognize, no, and actually they call it the perennial philosophy. This awareness has been throughout history. It just hasn't been mainstream, where actually there's no separation, that heaven is right here on earth, that the transcendent is immanent, the absolute is in the relative, that God, the infinite love intelligence of the universe, is in, through, and as all creation, and yet it's never absorbed by that creation, meaning it's everything that we are. It's infinite. It's impossible for there to be any place where it's not, because that would make it finite. So it's infinite. It's impossible to be outside of spirit ever, and yet spirit is more than all of this. Anything we can humanly conceive, any phenomenal existence, spirit is beyond all of that. So for centuries, spirit was primarily looked at as the transcendent aspect. And then as we've evolved, we've brought it back into the form. And the transcendental movement really started doing this consciously in the United States in the 1800s. And this New Thought movement, which was birthed from the transcendental movement, came along and said, we can actually consciously bring spirit into form, cultivate the perfection of spirit into form. And that was the idea of New Thought. So you hear a lot within the New Thought movement. And for those of you who are new, there's Unity, there's Centers for Spiritual Living, which is a teaching of science of mind. There's divine science. There's a lot of independent New Thought teachings. One could say Wayne Dyer, we bless him in his new dimension, absolutely was teaching New Thought. Deepak Chopra, Marianne Williamson, Neil Donald Walsh. Those are the more current names. We want to bring spirit into form. So that's why practical spirituality took on this really hot, it was a hot button phrase to say spirituality is here, it's now, it's present. So we all believe that, and I'm sure most of you have read and practiced this stuff from Wayne Dyer and Deepak Chopra and all this. So why would I have trouble with it? I don't have trouble with it in that I think it's a good thing, but I think there's also a limitation. So let me just explain myself. We work out our body for it to be healthy. And we know the more we work it out, the healthier it will be. If we cross-train, then it is capable of doing more things. So if I want to do a triathlon, I ride bike, swim, run, I want to play sports, I practice that. So the body is capable of many different things, and I get to focus on how I train it. And what we've also know is that's the same is true with the brain. We have this extraordinary thing called the brain that is capable, and they say we only use a small percentage of it. But in fact, I think our brain is capable of so much. So I think we're going to continue to find all these amazing ways we can use our brain. And so religious science, the reason why they have science to all these names, divine science, was to say that we can methodically use our brain to create different circumstances. There's a law of creation, and we can use our mind to start changing our thinking. And when we change our patterns of thinking, it starts to change our external effects. And that's the practical part. So we can affect our finances, our relationships, our whatever, employee, job, anything externally we want to affect. And then I think more recently it's gotten, it was so in the mind that's when the body started coming in, and yoga and qigong and reiki. And then with the heart, we're growing in heart work. I think one of the big ones is heart math. Are you all familiar with heart math? So some of you are. Heart math is the idea that the heart has actually more neurons than the brain does. And just look it up. It's amazing. If you look up anything heart math on YouTube, just the impact of the electromagnetic energy coming from your heart that impacts the external world, and it's immediate. So just if you look, it's amazing. If you watch it on any YouTube channels, you'll see the impact your heart has. So there's a thing called heart math where they monitor your heart, and you learn to regulate it and have a positive impact on the world around you through your heart. So we have heart, body, mind that are all impacting the world and impacting our life and impacting our external world. The reason why I started to have challenges with it is not because it's bad, but because I started to experience its limitations for me. And I realized came about because of how I define spirituality in my head, in my heart, in my body. So, bless you. For those of you who are familiar with Ken Wilber, he has 5 different definitions of spirituality. And he can spend about an hour talking about those 5 definitions. I'm not going to do that. I'm not even going to touch any of those 5 definitions because I can't think of one without just going off. The funny thing is, as much as I've heard his lecture and all the different ideas of what spirituality is, none of them resonated with me. And I recognize that for me, spirituality is very specific. And I'm saying it's for me because, as I said, there are probably many definitions of what spirituality means to different people. At least 5, I know that. But for me, spirituality is a transcendent love that we can have. I really resonate with the Corinthian statement that we can have everything else, but if we don't have love, it's as if we don't have anything. And again, that's my own personal bias of how I see spirit. And that my experience is personal love, my human love is limited. It's so small that it's a love that's so beyond me that it's not something I can control. It's not something I can master. I can only open to it and make it welcome. And that's a different experience than controlling our mind, our heart, and our body. For instance, I was in a meeting, a gathering once, and I was the guest. I wasn't part of this group. And the host of this group, he is a leader in the Heart Math organization. So he's not, they have the trainers and then the teachers, and then he's like way up there and that's what he does. And so in this gathering, in this one afternoon, there became a conflict that arose, and there was a lot of tension and some anger that was arising. Anger, people get passionate about their opinions, so my friend would argue with me about anger is not necessarily anger, it's just passion. So anyways, it was a passionate discussion about an ideal, and it was going on, and it was getting a little uncomfortable, and then suddenly the anger just started dissipating. And I'm just watching it, and I'm like, he's doing his heart math, I can tell. Like the whole energy in the room was shifting. And the anger was like people couldn't hold on to their anger if they wanted to. It was just dissolving. And it was so cool on the one hand, but it was very disconcerting. I told him, I said, I knew what you were doing there. You changed that whole energy in there. He just smiled. But I didn't feel the presence of God. I didn't feel the presence of love. I felt an energy that was being moved around And it was very real, and it was having a very powerful impact, but I didn't feel like whatever the discussion was, that wasn't getting healed. It was just dissolving. People's energy around it was dissolving. And so people walked out of that room, I felt unhealed, unresolved, but the anger was gone. And that really made me start thinking about this. What are we trying to do when we're trying to create and control the world outside of us? It's saying, I want certain experiences, and certain experiences are good, and other experiences are bad. But when we experience love, love is unconditional. It doesn't say that experience is more spiritual than that experience. Anger dissolving and everyone getting along on the surface is more spiritual than when people were angry and frustrated with one another. Love embraces all of it and says there's a reason and a gift in all of it if we allow it, if we allow ourselves to see and feel and know the gifts. And so for me, again, since I think we do want to make our world a better place, not just individually, but collectively. We want to work. We're talking about this at Centers for Spiritual Living, a world that works for everyone, coming together as communities to be for a world that works for everyone. And I am for that. But I also think that we're also intently trying to ascend. What I was pointing out to them is I said, a world that works for everyone from a human point of view might be different than what's God's idea of how a world that works for everyone. And we have to first and foremost be interested in the transcendent. I said, for me, a much more inspiring phrase is on earth as it is in heaven, because heaven is a higher ideal than just superhumans. Coming from a family of agnostics and atheists, I understand the idea of superhumans. And I'm not interested I like superhumans, but I know there's something else missing. There's always been that thing that's missing. And to me, that's the transcendent. And so the question then becomes, if we become more interested in the transcendent than anything else in the world, so as Jesus said, seek first the kingdom of God. Love God with your whole heart, body, mind, and soul. Bhagavad Gita, give everything you have to me. Give all your work, everything to me. Don't worry about results. Just give everything to me. Every mystic says, give everything to me. Leave all your desires, all your attachments, all your resistances. Leave that all and just give everything to me and let go. Is that practical? That is the question I've been with. Has my life been very practical up until now? Because I haven't focused on the external. And for me, everyone has to answer that. Y'all have to answer it for yourself. And that's why in my email out to everyone, I said this is an evolving conversation that I hope we have throughout the month. Because I don't have the definitive answer. But for me, spirituality is incredibly practical because of the essence of who I am every day of my life is first and foremost a vehicle of God, is a vehicle of the One. And my desire is to wake up and become more and more that embodiment of the One. That's my deepest heart longing, more than any other, more than money, more than having the right job. I do have the right spouse, but all that stuff. More than all of that, to want to be awake, in alignment, and an embodiment of that divine eternal love. And that does shift things. So I think of how that impacts our everyday life, and that's where I come to someone like Shunryu Suzuki, who's thank you for putting a quote on of his today, of my wonderful example of humility. That he didn't walk around demanding that people know what he knows. He was so humble, so sweet. And I was thinking about it because both his tradition, the Zen Buddhist tradition, and I love my monks on Mount Athos, both of those traditions are very strict. So they're not coming from, well, humble doesn't mean I just don't know anything. I just, gosh, shucks, maybe I'll, it's not that. They're very serious about what they believe and what they know. And in the midst of that, there's total and complete humility. And that's that razor's edge we're walking all the time, which is, I know that I know that I know, and I know nothing. I am a unique beautiful emanation of God, and I'm nothing special. And so I think what happens in New Thought, sometimes we only emphasize I'm a unique emanation, beautiful expression of pure spirit, and we forget about the more humble aspect of, and I'm nothing special. In Zen Buddhism, there's a practice of bowing throughout the day, just bowing, just saying, I'm surrendering to something greater than me. Because our finite self, if what we are raising up is our finite self, if all the money that I'm manifesting or the outer experience is all an expression of me, Harriet, look at me, look how great I am, I'm actually blocking myself from the kingdom of heaven, which is infinite and not defined by my limited finite self. So I'm actually going off the wrong track if my heart is closed, or it's about me, which is finite, as opposed to about God, the infinite love intelligence of the universe, which is everyone on this entire planet, and I am nothing special. And that, when we start to practice that, we start to experience a different form of life, where we don't have to hold on so tightly to showing up with our game face of being perfect, where we can falter, where we can fail in front of people. And that doesn't mean we're not spiritual. It just means we faltered, we failed, and that's part of it. That I'm nothing special. Ultimately, my finite self is limited. It has its limitations. And as long as I'm in this human body, I'm always going to have those limitations. And to start living with that as grace, not as a limit, but my limitations are the thing that reminds me that there's always something greater than me. And I get to see and to start feeling that in my everyday experience. When Shunryu Suzuki came over to America, he came over from a very definite, mythic, Zen Buddhist culture, which were in terms of discipline, how things should be, everything was a certain way. And the teacher-student relationship was a very serious relationship. He was what we would call abused, not physically, but emotionally by his teacher, but that's the way you did it. It was to beat down the ego. They went the extreme the other way, which is to beat him down like all the time since he was 11. But he loved his master. Interestingly, Yogananda, the same thing. His teacher was very hard on him. And when his master came from the other side of the veil and said, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have been so hard on you, he goes, oh no, it was the best thing you ever did for me. So they have actually a different tradition, which is not to build up the ego. So I always have to look at that, because I have Eastern teachers too, about how much in New Thought we build up ourselves individually. Again, it's not either or, it's paradoxical. But when he came over here, he was thrown into the exact opposite of the Zen Japanese culture, which is in Haight-Ashbury in the 60s, where you had all the flower children and, hey, let's go. You know, they were all just so open and available. And he said these long-haired hippies would just sort of wander into a Zen center and want to know about Buddhism. So on the one hand, he was so flexible. He said it's like a bamboo tree. You're very strong and you can go really far, but you don't break. So he still had his discipline and his structure. If you want to, he didn't teach Buddhism. He said, go sit. And you're going to sit for 40 minutes. You're not going to sit for 10 minutes or however it feels good for you until you build up. 40 minutes, day one, sit. It's going to hurt your legs. Deal with it. You know, there was that discipline part of him, but then there was this total flexibility of dealing with people who are a completely different cultural mindset than where he came from. And he was so beautiful with how he dealt with them. And to me, that is practical spirituality, where we can have a knowing, a strength, and yet that is so open and available, both the discipline and the heart-opening willingness. There's a great story of one of the students that had been coming his legs were really getting sore with the 40 minutes of meditation. So he went up to Shunryu Suzuki, they called him Suzuki Roshi, and he said, I really think 40 minutes is just a little too long. I think 30 minutes would be a lot better. And Suzuki Roshi said, oh, that's so interesting. He doesn't skip a beat. I love this guy. Oh, that's so interesting. I was just thinking 40 minutes wasn't long enough, that we should do 50 minutes. And he goes, well, let's just compromise and do 40 minutes. He always had a way. But that's what humility brings us. So my invitation with the big three for all month as we're practicing spirituality, to not answer the question, is spirituality practical? Is to see. Practice these three things throughout the month and see, is it practical? Is having strength and yet deep humility, being strong in knowing God and yet being open and available, is that something that's serving you in your everyday life? And the second one is unconditional gratitude. Master Eckhart, the Christian mystic, said, if you only say one prayer, thank you is enough. That's all you need to say is thank you. And Brother Stendhal Rice, David Stendhal Rice, he has his website and his whole ministry. He's a monk, a Benedictine monk. His whole ministry is just gratitude, just giving thanks. And it's called unconditional gratitude, and you're just thanking, I know someone who practices it, where you're just thanking, being grateful all day long for everything that's arising, whether it's good or whether it's bad. Because the idea is that, what's great about these mystics is they all start saying this, I'm just reading the same thing over and over, is you're grateful for everything. You use everything in your life is for your spiritual growth. Everything. It's not, I wish this would be better and then I can do my spiritual growth. That is, whatever you're in, that's your spiritual growth. So you're giving thanks and seeing the presence of God in whatever it is. So if it's affirming you, then you just say, thank you for affirming my beautiful, unique, magnificent self. If it's not affirming you, if it's sort of putting you down, thank you for reminding me of my finite self, of my limitations, of my weaknesses, that it keeps us with that humble, the strength and yet humility. Life is constantly giving us. The mundane ones are sometimes the hardest, but the intense experiences are usually pulling us up or pulling us down. And if we start using that in humility and gratitude, thank you for this experience, thank you for this experience, we're going to start feeling our hearts opening up. With humility, with unconditional gratitude for everything, it softens us. I guess that's really what it comes down to for me. When I feel, for me personally, that spirituality, that God is on the field, is my heart is softer. My heart is more gentle. That doesn't mean there's not strength to it. I want to be clear about that. That doesn't mean we're doormats. But there's a gentleness and a softness that comes with it. And I think, I keep talking about why the monks on Mount Athos draw me, is because there's a gentleness. They're very strong in what they believe, but there's such a gentleness to that strength. Humility, unconditional gratitude, and forgiveness. If we start bringing forgiveness into our life as a regular way of being, and in the past I've talked about forgiveness and told amazing stories of people who've forgiven in big ways, but for me it's always those ways just in everyday life. That so many of us just we get mad at life for not being the way we think it should be, or we get mad at ourselves for not being the way we think it should be, or people. So it could be against just sort of life itself. It could be against certain people, and it can be against ourselves. This is not saying someone's behavior is okay, but it's not, if someone's behaving in a way that hurts me, they're not doing it to hurt me because they're ignorant, because they're conscious. They're doing it because they're ignorant, and they're not doing it in conscious energy of who they really are. And as soon as we're awake, we can never hurt anybody intentionally. So forgiveness is just to allow our own hearts to soften towards ourself. If you notice, all three of these things, humility, unconditional gratitude, and forgiveness, are all about softening our hearts. To feel the presence and the power of Spirit in our everyday life, our hearts need to soften. We cannot I love one thing that Reverend Michael, he has these phrases that stick in your mind. And the one phrase was, God can do all things but work through a blocked vehicle. If our hearts are closed, we can't be available to the love that is always already present. We don't make love happen. That's why, the heart breath is great, but it's like controlling the love. The mind, we can sort of controlling things. And it is, Qigong, Reiki, it's all great, but there's also an allowance that we have to just start allowing and softening into that always already presence. In that Corinthians passage, love is patient. Love is not forcing itself on us, on our world. Soften, release, let go, allow. And there is this incredible power that starts to move through us, but not through force, not through our mind mind control, not through our heart control, not through our body control. There is an allowing. So the ultimate, the integral view is it's all God, right? So the ultimate is we work out our body not to be strong and like to put up walls. We work out our body so we can feel free with it. We can just move it and not feel self-conscious where it doesn't own us. We do work on our heart not to control it, but so it can be free, so it can be open, so it can be available. We work on our mind so we can stay focused on the presence of God. We use that energy that we use to create what we want, and we use that energy, that mind focus now to focus on the one, the single eye. Your eye is single, your whole body's full of light. Keep your single eye attention on the power and the presence and the love of God. Use your mind, use your heart, use your body, all to be in service to the one power, one presence, and that we surrender. We are humble. We are grateful for everything that is coming our way. We are forgiving. And then we start to experience this love that passes all human understanding, that does feel otherworldly and yet is fully present in every area of our life. That's for me, that is an aspect of practical spirituality. I don't want to limit it there. I want us to continue the exploration. I want you to explore this in your own life and come back with me and share with me whether you find it is practical in your everyday life or not. Practical is it actually impacting my everyday life? It's nice that we meditate every day, but is it actually impacting my everyday life? Does humility with strength, unconditional gratitude, and forgiveness actually impact my everyday life every day starting today, this very moment? Are you willing to do this with me this month, to explore these three things? Humility, thank you. Thank you. And may our hearts just open.